So it doesn't exactly take a genius to realize this, but Roblox is filled to the brim with shovelware. I mean, just take a quick look at the Discover page and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Just a shit ton of games that are pumped out for a quick buck. No real effort to them and no real passion. That's why I decided to dig a little deeper when I'm looking for games, and I ended up finding my favorite genre, closed community games, or CC games for short. Now you probably know what these are, I mean you did click on the video, but for those of you who don't, basically closed community games are games that are a lot more restrictive on who can join, which therefore leads to everybody pretty much knowing each other, leading to stuff like community-based lore, combat, economy, so on and so forth. Those community games have always been so much fun to me, but I've been around for quite a while. I have seen the rise and fall of many different closed community games. And especially recently, I've noticed a huge decline of both quality and quantity of closed community games. There's already been a few people who've been talking about it, but I feel like I should finally throw my hat into the ring, especially since I'm more of a commoner, if you will. Like, no offense to the bigger YouTubers, obviously, but it's very clear that they get basically handed all the OP shit, and that could really easily obscure, like, how good the actual game is. Because let's be honest, all the OP shit is always so much fun. But I have never really had any sort of special treatment in these games, so I really am just the average Joe, I guess. Corny, I know, but it gives me a pretty unique perspective. Now with that out of the way, let me show you the 4.5 reasons why closed community games are on a decline. Well, in my opinion.
Let's get scratching.
Is what I would have said, but first we gotta take a pretty important step to like most closed community games. And that's actually getting to play the damn thing, aka getting waived. 9 times out of 10, this is usually a pretty easy concept. You just join the Discord server, put your username, display name, and if you're lucky, you'll get picked out and you'll be able to join the game. That's usually how it goes. Keyword being usually. However, there have been times where some games make it super strict, sometimes even near impossible to join. I think a pretty popular example is probably a close community game you've probably heard of called Bleach Ultimate. Bleach Ultimate is pretty notorious for being downright impossible to get into. If you're not a Roblox celebrity, a social media celebrity, or a famous YouTuber, you're basically not getting into it. It's gotten to the point that it's even become a huge meme. Now, I do kind of understand those individuals should take priority, but if it gets to the point where the average person can basically not join at all, that's the problem. Another more recent problem is also charging money to get into these types of games. Now, I'm not gonna go too deep into it, as money is another reason entirely, but trust me, some of the prices get insane. Like I said, most of the time, it's just straight up put your name in and that's it. But sometimes it could get a lot worse. But let's move on before I start ranting more. So I think the first reason that most closed community games end up flopping is the actual, well, game itself. You see, about 90% of most closed community games are a type of game called a copy. I bet everyone has probably heard the term copy, but I know a lot of people who don't actually know what it means. Basically, a copy game is when the code is directly the same as the thing that's being copied. So it has the same mechanics, same combat, same everything. This obviously leads to the first problem, lack of originality. Most games are exactly like their predecessor, and that means flaws in all. It's pretty common to see these copy games copy a game without actually fixing what made that game die in the first place. Whether it be an oversight or a flaw, doesn't matter, usually they don't get fixed, which in turn leads to the copy dying. But some developers are smarter and actually try to add more original things to the copy, things that weren't in the previous game. And a lot of the things that they add are actually cool, on paper. In practice, 9 times out of 10, these new things are usually super unbalanced. It especially sucks when some of the better abilities in clans are usually locked behind a paywall. These are usually called specs, but I'll talk about them in a different section. Now, that was mostly about copies, but some of these problems also apply to even original closed community games. Sometimes developers just fuck up and don't see an oversight that they could have easily avoided and or fixed. Which actually segues perfectly to my next reason that most community games don't exactly last long. And that reason is the actual developers themselves working behind the scenes. So throughout all the time that I've been a part of closed community games, I can really boil down some of the developers into two sections. The sections in question being the unprepared developer and the toxic developer. Starting with the unprepared developer, it's kinda exactly what it sounds like. It's a developer that really underestimated what it takes to run a closed community game, copy or not. Unlike other games, you can't just make it and then just leave it be, fix it up and update it from time to time. You've got to put a lot more dedication into this game than like most other types of games. You got to keep your community happy, you have to actively interact with your community. If you have lore, you have to set that up and you probably have to be a part of it too. You have to keep other developers in check, you have to keep lore characters in check. It is just a lot. I could personally not see myself doing it. Like, I am lazy as all hell. Usually what happens is the developer goes in optimistic, really overestimates their own abilities. Then after a while they realize that they can't do this, and sadly just give up on whatever game they were making. The sad part is also that some people really try to make it work. I have seen developers go crazy over trying to develop closed community games. The truth of the matter is that managing closed community games takes up a lot of your time. And if you only have like a handful of people helping you, you're basically dedicating your entire life. I've met people who haven't seen people for days because they've just been working on this stupid game. I'll give credit where credit is due. They did their absolute best, but they just couldn't handle it, and it's not their fault for that. I'm not saying anyone who's an unprepared developer should feel bad. You tried your best. That's honestly the best you could do. It's okay. The second selection, however, is entirely the developer's fault. I'm of course talking about the toxic developers. These are the type of developers that usually just make a copy just to abuse their power in it. Even if they're making an original game, they'll probably still abuse their power anyways. There are numerous examples of toxic developers, and I've seen developers get criticized for adding a certain mechanic that obviously suck, but out of pure pride and spite, they just keep it in the game. There was this one time where a balancing team came out and straight up said, yeah, they haven't talked to us for days. We have no idea how the balance of the game is right now. Which is crazy to me. And then there are times where they're just straight up just bad people, like saying terrible shit to each other and their own communities. It's really sad. A bad developer can absolutely ruin a game, but I'd be lying if I said that it was entirely a developer's fault. A large part of it could also be the very community themselves. As much as I blame the developers for everything, a large chunk of the reasons why games die out so quickly is because of the community itself. All it really takes is just looking at whatever Discord the game is attached to and you'll immediately see what I'm talking about. People crapping on each other, threatening each other, hell, some people even go as far as doxing each other. Almost every closed community game has a super rude and extremely toxic community. That's just kinda how it is nowadays. And it really does suck because it kinda, kills the whole community aspect. But it's not just how they interact with each other, it's also how they interact with the game. A good example of this is probably freshie killing. If you don't know what freshie killing is, it's exactly how it sounds like. You just kill newer players. It's a good example because, well, you have no real reason to do it. It doesn't really reward you, it doesn't really give you anything. It's entirely for sport. People do it just because it's funny. Obviously, this prevents freshies actually making any real progress. They get frustrated, and they leave, and then they wonder why there's no new players. And that's just one example. There's tons of others, like not reporting bugs or exploits so they can use it themselves, actively being extremely mean to each other to the point that it kinda affects them in real life, and there's always just classic scamming, which is actually a pretty good segue to my final reason why these games die out so quickly, and it's all a simple word: greed. I personally believe that debatably, greed is probably the biggest reason why most of these games go down so quickly. I want to start off by saying that games need funding. All games need funding. I completely understand that. However, it becomes a problem when the prices become unreasonable for something so small. I remember one of the games that I was playing charged 400 Robux for a height reroll. A height reroll. I can't even remember how much a clan reroll was. It was actually insane. I mean, that high reroll basically costed as much as the average wave game pass. Which leads me to my second example actually, the paid access closed community games. Again, it's fine if a game is paid access as long as it's fairly reasonable. And for the most part, most closed community games are. Most prices range from anywhere from 200 to 500 Robux, so about like $5 worth. That's pretty okay. But then we have some absolutely ridiculous prices. I think you all heard the fiasco about this one like Masho game that was based off like the Masho anime. Yeah, that costed $30 to enter. $30! All for a game that's like super toxic and from what I've heard ended up being a total cash grab. And yes, the game's basically dead, so It was also very clearly pay to win, which leads me to my next topic. Selling really, really overpowered abilities for actual real world cash. If you don't know what a spec is, basically it's an ability that only one person can have at a time. And as you can probably guess, it's really, really overpowered. Usually they're won by being an important member in the community, winning some sort of like tournament and winning it as a prize, or just a simple giveaway at least. But nowadays, specs are being sold, making the game straight up pay to win, which is crazy to me. Obviously, most people can't pay for this stuff and feel frustrated that they're being left in the dust, so they just quit. And that's really the end of it. Because of these four main reasons that are honestly all pretty avoidable if the developers just paid a little bit more attention, if the games were just a bit more original, if the community was just a tiny bit nicer, could all be avoided. Right now, closed community games are in a pretty terrible spot, and sadly, I don't really see it going back to normal anytime soon. But you know what? I still have some hope. Maybe the next big game will finally be the one. That's what we always tell ourselves, right? With all that being said, I wish everybody a good day. Hope you had a great April Fools, and I bid you adieu. So long. Also, seriously, please stop pricing everything for so fucking expensive.